She buried her parents at dawn and raised twins who were never truly heard. If you crave stories where love becomes a crime and truth comes at a cost, like, subscribe, and step into Tales and Shadow Chronicles. The morning her parents were buried, dawn came too early, like it was ashamed of what it had witnessed in the night. Amara Okari stood barefoot in the damp red soil at the edge of Makoko, the lagoon mist clinging to her thin dress, as if trying to pull her back into childhood. She was 13, but grief had aged her beyond counting. The shallow grave had been dug by men who asked no questions and accepted no names, their faces unreadable as they lowered her father first. Then her mother, wrapped in borrowed cloth. The twins cried in her arms, their cries sharp and urgent, cutting through the quiet like accusations. Amara rocked them gently, whispering lies she hoped would become truth, that everything would be fine, that this was just another bad morning, that their parents would return when the sun climbed higher. She did not cry. Crying felt like a luxury for people who had somewhere safe to fall apart. As the men covered the grave, an old neighbor lingered, a woman with cloudy eyes and a voice like dry leaves. She stared at the twins longer than politeness allowed, her lips moving as if counting something only she could see. These children, the woman murmured finally, her tone uneasy, they carry a heavy shadow. Amara stiffened, tightening her hold around the babies. She snapped back that grief made people say foolish things, that the twins were her brothers, born into the same suffering, bound by the same blood. The woman shook her head slowly, crossing herself before walking away. Amara watched her go, irritation burning through her numbness. She turned back to the grave, pressing her palm into the wet earth, making a silent vow she believed with all her heart. Whatever secrets the world carried, she would protect these children from them. She did not know that the ground beneath her vow was already cracked. Makoko did not soften for grief. By the next day, hunger returned with its familiar sharpness, and Amara learned quickly that sorrow did not feed mouths. She began at the traffic junctions, carrying one twin strapped to her back and the other balanced on her hip, her voice low and steady as she asked for help. At first, shame burned her throat raw, but the streets taught her efficiency. She learned where drivers were kindest, which shop owners chased her away, and how to lower her eyes just enough to seem humble without disappearing entirely. Coins dropped into her palm like reluctant blessings. Some days she earned enough for Gary and sardines. Other days she went to sleep counting breaths instead of food. Through it all, the twins grew, slowly, stubbornly, fed as much by her devotion as by what little nourishment she could find. Though identical in face, they were different in presence. One smiled easily, reaching for strangers with open curiosity, his cries quick to fade. The other watched in silence, his dark eyes tracking movement with unsettling focus, as if memorizing the world instead of trusting it. Amara noticed, but she dismissed the unease that crept into her thoughts. How could babies raised in hunger not develop differently? At night, she told them stories about their parents, about a father who laughed loudly and a mother whose hands were always warm, carefully stitching a family history she needed as much as they did. She never questioned why some details felt borrowed, or why certain memories slipped away when she tried to hold them too tightly. The streets rewarded survival, not reflection, and Amara learned to move forward without looking back. As the years passed, hunger sharpened Amara into someone resourceful and unrecognizable. She learned when to beg and when to steal, when to run and when to stand her ground. Once, caught slipping bread from a roadside stall, she took the beating without a sound, her mind fixed only on the twins waiting behind the abandoned bus where they slept. That night, as she cleaned her wounds under a flickering streetlight, she noticed a thin scar on one twin's shoulder, too deliberate, too old to be an accident of street life. Her fingers lingered there longer than necessary, a chill creeping into her chest. She told herself scars were common in places like this, that the world marked everyone eventually. Still, she began to watch him more closely, noticing how his temper flared faster, how he reacted to raised voices with instinctive fear rather than confusion. Love, she learned, was not soft. It was discipline, sacrifice, and silence. She lied when officials asked questions. She claimed family connections that did not exist. She forged a story so often it became real in her mouth. When an old woman at the roadside stared too long at the twins and whispered, "These ones carry another man's blood," Amara snapped at her, dragging the boys away with a fury that startled even herself. That night, as rain hammered against rusted roofs, Amara held the twins close and promised them something she did not yet understand the weight of, that she would never let anyone take them from her. Outside, the city roared on, indifferent and vast, already arranging the consequences of that promise. The old woman appeared again on a Tuesday afternoon when the heat pressed down like a warning. Amara had stationed herself near the bus stop, the twins seated on flattened cardboard at her feet, their palms dusty from playing with pebbles. The woman stood across the road at first, watching. She wore faded wrappers and a scarf tied too tightly around her head, her posture stiff, as though she had arrived carrying something heavy she could not put down. When traffic stalled, she crossed slowly, her eyes never leaving the boys. Amara felt the familiar prickle of irritation. People stared all the time, but this was different. The woman did not look at Amara with pity. She looked past her, as if the girl were only a doorway to something else. "Children like these don't come twice," the woman said softly, kneeling despite the grime. Her voice trembled, especially not from that house. Amara stiffened. "Which house?" she snapped. The woman swallowed. "Your parents' house. There was shouting that night. Blood is loud when it spills." Amara stood abruptly, pulling the twins to her chest. Rage flared hot and sudden, fueled by exhaustion and fear. She accused the woman of madness, of inventing stories to scare children, of speaking ill of the dead. The woman did not argue. Instead, she reached into her wrapper and produced a thin gold chain, tarnished but unmistakably expensive. "Your mother dropped this while running," she said. "She was screaming your name, not theirs." The word struck Amara like a slap. For a moment, the noise of the street faded, replaced by a hollow ringing in her ears. She pushed the chain away, refusing to touch it, refusing to see the memory it tried to summon. When she looked up again, the woman was already retreating into the crowd. That night, Amara lay awake beside the twins, the rain tapping insistently on rusted metal. She told herself old women lied, that grief made people cruel. Still, for the first time since the burial, sleep did not come easily. Memory is a dangerous thing when it wakes too suddenly. Amara began to notice small fractures in the stories she told herself. Her mother's face, once warm and constant in her mind, now appeared in flashes: sweat-slicked skin, wide, terrified eyes, a hand pressing against Amara's chest, as if to push her away from something unseen. The night before her parents died returned in pieces. Raised voices, the twins crying louder than usual, her father shouting a name that was not hers. Each recollection came with a sharp pain, like stepping on broken glass. Amara tried to smother these thoughts with routine. She begged harder, worked longer hours, returned later each night, hoping exhaustion would keep memory at bay. But hunger sharpens truth as much as it sharpens need. One evening, as she bathed the twins in a borrowed basin, she noticed how one recoiled at the touch of water, his small body stiffening as if bracing for impact. The other laughed, splashing freely. Amara's chest tightened. She remembered now, remembered her mother pulling one baby away from her father's grasp, screaming that he wasn't supposed to be there, that they would all die if the truth came out. Amara dropped the cloth, her hands shaking. She pressed her forehead to the wall, breathing through the terror clawing up her throat. Blood, she realized dimly, was not always family, and family was not always safe. But the twins were watching her, their faces expectant, trusting. So she swallowed the truth, as she had swallowed hunger so many times before. She smiled. She finished bathing them, and she decided, without ceremony, that whatever secrets lay buried with her parents would remain there, The man in the dark blue suit did not belong to the street. Everything about him announced distance, from the polished leather shoes to the faint scent of cologne that cut through exhaust fumes. Amara noticed him because he stopped too suddenly, his driver nearly slamming on the brakes. The twins were older now, their faces lean, eyes bright. They stood beside her as she held out her hand, reciting the same practiced plea. The man looked down, and something in him broke. His breath caught audibly, his face draining of color as though he had seen a ghost. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he crouched, his expensive trousers brushing dirt, his gaze fixed on the twins with an intensity that made Amara uneasy. His hand trembled as he reached into his wallet, pulling out more money than she had ever seen at once. He did not leave immediately. He asked their names. He asked Amara's name. When she answered, something dark flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, fear, regret. "I knew your parents," he said quietly, standing at last. The words landed heavily between them. Amara nodded, unsure whether to feel grateful or threatened. Before she could respond, the traffic surged forward, horns blaring. The man retreated to his car, but not before looking back, once, twice, as though trying to memorize the scene. That evening, Amara counted the money over and over, unable to shake the feeling that she had been weighed and found wanting. Somewhere in the city, Chief Adekunle Balogun sat in silence, staring at his hands, knowing the past had finally found him. Adekunle returned the next day, and the day after that, always at the same hour, always with the same careful distance, as if afraid to come too close. He brought food sometimes, medicine other days, and once a small bag of clothes for the twins that made Amara's throat tighten. He spoke gently, never raising his voice, asking questions that seemed harmless, how long she had been alone, where she slept, whether the twins went to school. Amara answered cautiously, instinct warning her that nothing given so freely was ever without cost. Yet she could not deny the relief his presence brought. Hunger loosened its grip. Fear retreated slightly. For the first time in years, the future seemed less like a wall and more like a door half open. But love, she sensed, was not what pulled Adekunle back to her. It was something heavier, something unresolved. She caught him once watching the twins when he thought no one noticed, his eyes wet, his jaw clenched as though holding back a confession. "Charity is easy," he told her one afternoon, his voice low. "But some debts cannot be paid with money." Amara did not ask what he meant. She had learned that questions invited answers she might not survive. Still, when he touched her hand in parting, just briefly, she felt the tremor there, the echo of a past mistake reaching for redemption. And in that moment, without knowing why, Amara understood this man would change everything. The sickness did not arrive like an emergency. It crept in quietly, the way poverty often does. It began with coughing that refused to leave, with fevers that rose at night and retreated by morning, leaving the twins weak and glass-eyed. Amara told herself it was only exhaustion, the harmattan dust, the night spent too close to the lagoon's damp breath. But when one twin collapsed at the roadside, his small body burning in her arms, fear finally overpowered denial. She ran, past shouting drivers, past vendors and prayers, until her legs shook beneath her. The clinic smelled of bleach and impatience. A nurse barely looked at her before listing costs that might as well have been impossible numbers. Amara stood there nodding, her heart pounding, knowing she had no answers to give. Adekunle arrived before she could decide which lie to tell first. He did not hesitate. He spoke to the doctors in low, firm tones, his presence rearranging the room. Money moved. Beds appeared. Medicine flowed. Amara watched from the corner, relief and dread tangling inside her chest. Gratitude came easily. Dependence did not. As the twins slept under thin white sheets, Adekunle stood beside her, his face carved with something close to anguish. "They shouldn't suffer like this," he murmured, not quite to her. Amara gripped the rail of the bed, understanding instinctively that this illness was not only a test of survival, it was an opening, and something would step through it, The bill came folded neatly inside an envelope, as though courtesy could soften its cruelty. Amara stared at the figures until they blurred, her hands cold despite the heat. Adekunle took the paper from her gently, reading without expression. "I will handle this," he said, and for a moment she felt the crushing weight lift from her chest. Then he continued, his voice quieter now, careful. "But there must be an understanding." The word landed between them, heavy and deliberate. He spoke of adoption, of opportunity, of giving one child a future untouched by hunger. He spoke as though splitting a heart were a reasonable transaction. Amara shook her head violently, stepping back as if he had struck her. "They are mine," she said, the certainty in her voice surprising even herself. Adekunle did not raise his voice. He only looked at her, sadness etched deep into his features. "Not both," he replied. Silence swallowed the room. Outside, a child cried. A trolley rattled past. Amara felt something ancient and terrible stir within her, the understanding that this was not a request born of kindness, but of obligation. She remembered the old woman's words, remembered her mother's scream. When Adekunle added softly, "The debt was written long before today," her knees nearly gave way. She left the hospital that night with the twins alive and breathing, but with the certainty that the cost of that mercy had not yet been paid. Rain fell hard that night, drumming against tin roofs and drowning the city in confusion. Amara barely slept. The twins stirred restlessly, fever breaking at last, their breaths uneven but alive. At some point between exhaustion and fear, she must have closed her eyes. When she woke, the space beside her felt wrong, too open, too empty. Panic seized her instantly. She called out, her voice cracking, scrambling through the darkness. One twin lay where she had left him. The other was gone. The door hung slightly ajar, rainwater pooling at the threshold like a mocking answer. The search was frantic and futile. Neighbors whispered. Some avoided her eyes. Others looked at her with a new, sharper judgment. By morning, the story had already grown teeth. She had sold a child. Love, they said, made women foolish. Money, they said, made them cruel. Amara screamed until her throat burned, swearing she had never agreed, never consented, never betrayed her children. But the streets had chosen their version. When Adekunle arrived later that day, his face drawn and solemn, he did not ask questions. He only said, "I am sorry," in a way that sounded too much like finality. The wedding was quiet, almost secretive, held in a registry office that smelled of old paper and compromise. Amara wore a borrowed dress that did not fit her grief. Adekunle stood beside her, composed and distant, his hand firm on hers, but his eyes elsewhere. There was no celebration, no music, only signatures and witnesses who pretended not to notice the absence that hung between them. Amara told herself she was doing this for the child she still had, for safety, for shelter. Love did not enter the calculation. Survival did. The city, ever efficient in forgetting, buried the missing child report under more urgent concerns. Adekunle's house swallowed Amara whole, its quiet corridors, its locked doors, its unspoken rules. Her remaining son grew in this new world, angry and restless, sensing the lie beneath the comfort. At night, Amara lay awake beside her husband, listening to his breathing, wondering whether marriage was just another form of silence. Somewhere beyond the gates, the rain washed the streets clean, but nothing touched the stain she carried inside her. Luxury did not heal Amara. It only rearranged her pain. The house was large, cold, and meticulously ordered, every surface polished as if to reflect nothing back. Servants moved quietly, trained not to ask questions. Adekunle grew distant, often absent, his phone calls sharp and coded. Amara learned to read the mood of the house the way she once read the streets, listening for danger, for raised voices, for the slam of a door. Her son grew taller, his temper sharper, his silences longer. Sometimes she caught him staring at her with a look that felt accusatory, as though he sensed she had chosen him at another's expense. At night, memories returned uninvited. Her mother's scream, The rain. The open door. Amara pressed her hands against her ears, but the past spoke anyway. She began to understand that fear was the foundation of this life. Not love, not wealth, but fear carefully disguised as protection. And somewhere beyond the walls, a truth she had buried was learning how to walk back toward her. Power did not announce itself when it entered Adekunal's life. It settled in quietly, the way mold grows in damp walls. At first, it was meetings that ran late, men in tailored suits speaking in coded respect, phones that rang only to fall silent when Amara entered the room. Then came the banners, the smiling photographs, the rehearsed humility of public appearances. Adekunal learned how to speak of service while calculating loyalty, how to shake hands without offering warmth. Amara watched him transform from a man haunted by his past into one protected by influence. His laughter grew rarer, his temper sharper. When challenged, his voice did not rise, it hardened. And in that hardness, Amara glimpsed something familiar. The same violence she remembered from the night her parents died, the same silence that followed. Their son changed too. He grew into his anger like armor, testing boundaries, flinching at authority, drawn instinctively toward confrontation. Once, during a heated argument, he shouted that he wished he had chosen differently. The word struck Amara like a blade. She slapped him without thinking, the sound echoing through the room, shocking them both. In the aftermath, she wept alone, realizing the truth she had avoided for years. Power had not saved them. It had only delayed reckoning. Outside their walls, Adekunal's name began to circulate with reverence and fear, and Amara understood that the higher he climbed, the farther the fall would reach. The boy appeared at the edge of a campaign rally, thin and defiant, his clothes worn, but his gaze unbroken. Amara noticed him before anyone else, not because of his anger, but because of the way he stood, mirroring her son's posture without knowing it. When their eyes met, something in her chest tightened painfully. He did not look away. Later that evening, as Adekunal's convoy departed, the boy stepped forward, blocking her path with a boldness that startled the guards. "You don't remember me," he said quietly, "but I remember you." His voice carried a weight that did not belong to youth. When he spoke her childhood name, one she had not heard since her mother's last breath, the world tilted. They met again days later, away from cameras and crowds. He told his story in fragments. Foster homes, beatings, streets that were crueler than Makoko had ever been. He bore a scar on his shoulder, identical to the one she remembered bathing years ago. "They told me I was bought," he said flatly, "but I know I was stolen." Amara denied everything at first, her voice trembling, her mind racing for escape. Yet as he spoke, memories aligned with sickening clarity. She realized then that the past had not returned seeking comfort. It had come for truth, and it had teeth. The accusation broke like a storm the city could not ignore. The boy stood before cameras and microphones, his hand steady as he named Adekunal Balagan a murderer. He spoke of a man who had paid to erase a child, of blood spilled in a house long before politics laundered its memory. The media devoured the story hungrily. Supporters denied it. Enemies amplified it. Adekunal's face, once carefully composed, cracked under scrutiny. At home, he raged, not in shouts but in chilling calm. "You brought him," he told Amara, his voice devoid of warmth. She understood then that love had never shielded her. It had only made her complicit. When the trial was announced, the city leaned in. Amara sat alone in the courtroom on the first day, watching the boy, now a man, stand tall despite everything taken from him. Her son sat elsewhere, silent, jaw clenched, hatred and confusion warring in his eyes. As testimonies unfolded, Amara felt her memories fracture, rearranging themselves into a truth too sharp to hold. She realized the question was no longer who had committed the crime, but who had survived it, and at what cost. Outside, dawn crept over the city once more, indifferent as ever, preparing to witness another burial, this time of lies. The courtroom felt smaller than it looked on television, its air thick with expectation and unspoken verdicts. Amara sat rigidly, hands folded in her lap, as witnesses rose one after another, each testimony peeling away a layer of the life she had built. Dates were spoken, addresses named, photographs displayed. The boy, no, the man, stood firm as he recounted memories no child should have carried alone. The night he was taken, the confusion, the silence that followed. Adekunle listened without interruption, his face a careful mask, though Amara noticed the way his fingers tapped once against the armrest whenever her parents' names were mentioned. It was a tell, small and precise, and it terrified her how well she recognized it. As proceedings dragged on, Amara's memories began to betray her. The past rearranged itself in her mind, scenes overlapping, sounds bleeding into one another. Her mother's scream returned, not as fear, but as warning. Her father's voice rose in anger, then cut off abruptly. She remembered now the twins crying, remembered one of them closer to the doorway, clutching something heavy in his small hands. The realization came slowly, like dawn breaking over a city that had never slept. Amara closed her eyes, breath shuddering, knowing the trial was no longer about Adekunle alone. It was about her, about what she had chosen not to see. The truth surfaced not as accusation, but as inevitability. A former neighbor testified, an old man with shaking hands and a voice worn thin by years of silence. He spoke of the fight that night, of shouting that spilled into the street, of children crying while adults argued over secrets too dangerous to keep. He described seeing one twin rush forward in fear, the other frozen in place. He described the sound, a dull, final impact that ended the argument forever. The courtroom went still. Adekunle did not move. Amara felt her heart splinter. Later, alone in the quiet of the witness room, Amara finally allowed herself to remember everything. Her father had not meant to die. The blow had not been planned. It had been instinct panic, the chaos of a child raised on fear. The twins had been too young to understand what they were fighting over, but old enough to carry the consequence. Amara pressed her palms to her face, sobbing silently. All those years, she had believed she was saving innocence. Instead, she had preserved guilt. The final realization did not come from testimony, but from her son's eyes. He watched the proceedings with a fury that finally made sense, his jaw tight, his shoulders tense, as if bracing for a blow that never came. Amara saw now what she had refused to name. The twin she kept had always been the more volatile, the quicker to anger, the one who reacted before thinking. The twin she lost, the one taken into cruelty and abandonment, had been the gentler soul. The roles she believed she understood were reversed. Salvation had not chosen innocence. It had chosen familiarity. When Amara spoke at last, her voice barely carried across the room. She did not defend herself. She did not plead. She told the truth as she now understood it, that fear had guided her, that love had blinded her, that survival had demanded a choice she never realized she was making. Adekunle watched her with something like relief, as though the burden had finally shifted. The city would decide their fates, but Amara already knew her sentence. It was memory. It was motherhood. It was knowing she had saved the wrong child. Adekunle fell quietly. No dramatic arrest, no spectacle, just resignation, statements, doors closing behind him one by one. Power abandoned him as easily as it had arrived. Amara did not visit him. There was nothing left to say. Their marriage, she realized, had been a mutual hiding place, his from the law, hers from the truth. Love, she learned too late, could become a crime when it protected the wrong things. Her son withdrew further, his anger turning inward. He did not forgive her, and she did not ask him to. Forgiveness, like innocence, could not be demanded. Amara watched him from a distance, understanding now that motherhood did not end with sacrifice. It continued with accountability. She had loved fiercely. She had chosen blindly. And love, when stripped of truth, had made her complicit. Dawn returned the way it always did, without apology. Amara stood alone by the lagoon, older now, quieter, the city breathing behind her. She thought of the girl she had been, barefoot and grieving, clutching two crying babies beneath a sky that did not care. She thought of all the mornings that followed, each one built on the last, each one shaped by a choice she did not know she was making. The water shimmered faintly as the sun rose, indifferent and beautiful. She did not ask for redemption. Some stories did not offer it. Instead, she allowed herself to remember fully for the first time without fear. Love had saved her once. Love had destroyed her later. And in that terrible balance, Amara finally understood the truth her mother had tried to scream into the night. Survival is not innocence. It is only endurance. As the city woke around her, Amara turned away from the water and walked forward, carrying the weight of her story into the light. She thought love would save them. Instead, it decided who would suffer. One child vanished. One truth survived, and a mother was left carrying both. But here's the question. If you had made her choice, would you have saved the innocent child or the one you loved?
Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more.